The morning sky was painted with soft shades of orange and gold when Daniel closed the trunk of his car. He looked over at Clara, who was locking the front door of their house. Her long hair tied back casually, her face calm but distant. They had planned this trip for weeks. Yet Daniel couldn't shake this strange feeling that something deeper was hidden beneath Clara's quiet smile. "Ready?" he asked, as she walked toward him, her bag slung over her shoulder. She nodded. "More." Then, "Ready." Behind them, another car pulled into the driveway. Adrian stepped out first, stretching his arms as though he had been waiting for this day his whole life. Sophia followed, her laughter soft as she adjusted her scarf against the cool breeze. Finally, Adrian called. "Thought you two would." "Change your minds." Clara smiled politely, and Daniel forced a grin. They were all old friends who had once been inseparable during their college years. But life had scattered them into jobs, responsibilities, and marriages that dulled some of the fire they used to carry. This trip, Clara had insisted, would bring that spark back. The four of them exchanged greetings. Their words light and familiar, yet Daniel noticed small things. Clara's smile seemed warmer when directed at Sophia, almost as though the two women shared a private joke. And when Adrian clapped him on the shoulder, Daniel caught a flicker of something in his friend's eyes, something unspoken, something. Curious, they divided into their cars. Daniel drove with Clara beside him, while Adrian and Sophia followed close behind. The road stretched long, winding through hills and endless fields. The radio played softly, but most of the time Clara sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've been quiet," Daniel finally said. Glancing at her dot, Clara turned, her eyes thoughtful. "Just thinking, it feels good. Leaving everything behind for a few days." Daniel nodded, but inside he felt the weight of her words. Leaving everything behind. It almost sounded as though she wasn't just talking about work or routine. As the miles passed, Clara began to relax. She hummed along with the music, her fingers tapping lightly against the window. Occasionally, she glanced in the side mirror, checking on Adrian and Sophia's car behind them. Each time she did, a faint smile touched her lips. Daniel couldn't help but notice. The hours slipped by. They stopped once for coffee, laughing together like old times. Adrian told a story about his workplace chaos, and Sophia teased him until Clara nearly spilled her drink from laughing too hard. For a moment, Daniel felt grateful. Maybe this trip really was what they needed. A reminder that friendship and joy still existed beyond the monotony of daily life. By late afternoon, the road narrowed into a path lined with towering trees. The mountain air grew cooler, crisp, and refreshing. Birds sang from the branches above, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden streaks. The destination was near. "There it is," Clara whispered, pointing ahead. The cabin appeared like a secret hidden in the wood's wooden walls. A sloping roof and a wide porch that faced the valley below. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, as though welcoming them even before they stepped inside. Adrian parked behind them and whistled softly. "This is better than the pictures online." Sophia clasped her hands together. "It's perfect. Like a storybook." They carried there. Bags inside, their footsteps echoing against polished wooden floors. The cabin smelled of pine and fresh earth, with shelves stacked with books and a fireplace waiting to be lit. Clara walked slowly through the rooms, trailing her hand across the walls, her face glowing with something Daniel hadn't seen in a long time, a kind of anticipation. A hunger for something new. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, painting the sky in pink and violet, the group gathered on the porch. Adrian opened a bottle of wine, and they sat together, watching the last light fade over the valley. The conversation flowed easily at first, stories from the past, jokes about their younger selves. It's the kind of talk that felt safe and familiar. But every so often, Daniel caught Clara watching Sophia. He caught Sophia meeting Clara's gaze and holding it just a little too long. It was subtle, so subtle that he wondered if he was imagining it. "Feels like a different world out here," Adrian said, leaning back in his chair. Clara lifted her glass, her eyes reflecting the fading light. That's the beauty of it. Out here, nothing follows us. No expectations, no routines. Her words lingered in Daniel's mind. No routines, no expectations. He looked at her, searching for meaning, but she had already turned her gaze back toward Sophia, who was smiling faintly into her glass. The night air grew cooler, and a hush settled over the mountains. The laughter slowed and the silence stretched comfortably between them. Yet beneath that silence there was an invisible current, something rising slowly. Something all of them felt but none dared to name. Daniel sat with his arm resting on the chair, watching the stars appear above the trees. For years, he had believed he understood his wife completely, that he knew her thoughts, her dreams, her fears. But in that moment, seeing the quiet fire in Clara's eyes as she whispered something to Sophia that made them both laugh softly, he realized there were parts of her he no longer recognized. And for the first time, Daniel wondered if this trip would bring them closer together or pull them further apart. The mountains stood silent, keeping their secrets. The cabin glowed warmly from within, as though it too sensed the storm that was quietly gathering. That night, when Daniel lay in bed beside Clara, he found sleep impossible. She turned away from him, facing the window where moonlight spilled across her skin. And though her breathing was steady, he knew she was awake, lost in thoughts she would not share. He closed his eyes, but the unease only deepened. Something was coming, something he could not stop. And deep inside, Daniel feared that when it came, nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The wooden door creaked softly as Adrian pushed it open, and a rush of warm air greeted them. The cabin felt alive, as though it had been waiting for their arrival. The polished floors glimmered faintly in the fading light. The tall stone fireplace stood proudly at the heart of the living room, and woven rugs lay scattered. Softening the sound of their steps, Clara moved slowly from room to room, her fingertips brushing along the wooden walls, the corners of her lips lifting into a smile. She looked almost like a child discovering a secret hideout. Daniel followed behind her, his heart tightening at the sight. He hadn't seen her look so alive in months. At home she often seemed distracted, burdened by thoughts she never voiced. But here, she seemed free. Sophia, with her gentle grace, let out a sigh of admiration. It feels so untouched. Like we've stepped into another time. Adrian dropped his bags near the couch and stretched. Exactly what we needed. No phones, no noise, no city madness. Just us, they unpacked. Together. Laughter echoing through the cabin as Adrian fumbled with the old stove and Sophia teased him. Clara lit candles on the table, their glow mingling with the fading light outside. Soon the scent of pasta and herbs filled the air, and the four of them gathered at the wooden table, wine glasses in hand. At first, dinner was cheerful. Stories flowed as Alibo colleagues at work, clumsy neighbors, silly mistakes from the past. Clara laughed until her cheeks flushed, and Daniel found himself studying her as though seeing her from a distance. Something in her laughter tonight was different, deeper, more real. But the fire crackled in the background and the wine loosened their words. The tone of the evening shifted. Clara leaned back in her chair, her glass of wine dangling between her fingers. She stared into the flames for a long while before she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost thoughtful. "You know," she said, "sometimes I wonder how different life would be if we stepped outside the lines we've drawn for ourselves." Daniel looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Clara tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "We live by rules, don't we? Wake up at the same time, go to work, come home, cook, sleep, repeat. Even in our marriages, there are boundaries we never cross, routines we never question." Sophia leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm. "She's right. We keep ourselves safe, too safe sometimes." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "And what's wrong with safe?" "Safe keeps us steady. Safe keeps us married." Clara smiled faintly. but there was something in her smile that unsettled Daniel. But doesn't safe also keep us from feeling alive? The room grew quiet. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to remind Clara that safety was what held their lives together. But the way her eyes flickered toward Sophia made his words die in his throat. Sophia broke the silence with a gentle laugh, but there was weight in her tone. Sometimes I think about it too. How many chances do we let pass because we're too afraid of what they'll mean? Her words hung in the air, soft yet heavy, like raindrops that refused to fall. Adrian cleared his throat. Sounds like the wine's talking, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of curiosity in his expression. Clara swirled her wine, her gaze never leaving Sophia. The fire crackled louder, as though urging them onward, daring them to say the things they had buried for too long. Daniel watched, his stomach churning with unease. He could feel something forming between the women, a silent thread that pulled them closer with each passing glance down to ease the tension. Daniel tried to shift the conversation back to something lighter. He told a story about a mishap at his office, earning a few laughs, but the undercurrent in the room had already changed. Clara and Sophia still shared secret smiles, their laughter softer, more private. The night wore on. The candles burned low, casting shadows that danced along the cabin walls. Outside, the forest whispered with the sound of wind through the trees. The four of them settled around the fireplace, the warmth wrapping around them like a blanket. Daniel sat across from Clara, his heart aching as he watched her. She looked radiant in the firelight, her eyes glowing with a light he hadn't seen in years. Yet that light wasn't for him. It was for Sophia. Sophia noticed his gaze and offered him a kind smile, but even that smile carried layers he couldn't untangle. Adrian stretched out comfortably with his glass of wine, seemed oblivious, or perhaps he was pretending not to notice. The silence grew heavier, charged with emotions unspoken. Daniel tried to speak again, but Clara was faster. "You ever wonder," she said softly, "if happiness lies in breaking the very rules we cling to?" Her question hung in the air like smoke, curling and filling every corner of the cabin. Daniel's chest tightened. "Clara," he began, but the words refused to come. He didn't know what he wanted to say, didn't know if he wanted to stop her or understand her. Sophia leaned closer to Clara, her shoulders brushing as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "Maybe," Sophia whispered, "the only way to really live is to dare." The flames roared suddenly, sending sparks up the chimney as though the fire itself approved of the thought. Daniel gripped his glass tighter, his knuckles white dot. In that moment, he knew something was unraveling. Something far beyond his control. And as the night settled deeper around them, with the wind howling outside and the fire flickering within, Daniel realized that whatever unspoken current had been pulling at them since the drive was only growing stronger. None of them knew where it would lead. None of them dared to say it aloud. But deep down, all four felt it the night was only just beginning. The fire had burned low, leaving behind glowing embers that pulsed like quiet hearts inside the stone fireplace. The room was dim, lit only by the faint orange light and the soft flicker of half-melted candles on the table. Outside, the forest sang with a distant sound of crickets and the occasional whisper of the wind brushing through the trees. The four of them sat together, yet something in the air had shifted. The laughter of earlier was gone, replaced by silence that felt too heavy to ignore. Daniel stared at his glass, tracing the rim with his finger. While Adrian leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed thoughtfully as though sensing what was coming, Clara sat close to Sophia, their shoulders brushing. Daniel noticed it immediately, the way Clara leaned ever so slightly toward her, the way Sophia didn't pull away. Their closeness wasn't new, but tonight it felt different, more deliberate, as though the invisible barrier between them had thinned. It was Sophia who finally broke the silence. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as though she had rehearsed the words in her mind 1,000 times. "What if she began softly, her eyes resting on the fire, just for one night. We let go of the rules we always follow. Daniel's head lifted sharply. Rules, he repeated, his voice unsteady. Sophia glanced at him, then at Clara, and finally at Adrian. The rules of marriage. The routines. The boundaries we never cross because we're afraid of what might happen if we do. Clara's lips curved into a small, nervous smile, but there was no hesitation in her voice when she added, "She means, what if we tried something different? Something will. Never forget, what if? We swapped partners for the night." The words struck Daniel like a stone thrown into still water. His heart pounded, his breath caught in his chest. He stared at Clara, unable to understand if she was joking, if this was the wine talking, or if she truly meant it. Adrian sat upright, his eyes locked on Sophia. "Sophia," he began, his voice low, unsure, but she held his gaze with calm certainty. The silence that followed was unbearable. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire, mocking their discomfort. No one laughed. No one brushed it off as a silly game. The suggestion was real, hanging in the air like smoke too thick to breathe. Daniel's mind raced. Was Clara serious? Did she want this? He searched her face for answers, but her expression betrayed nothing except a strange mix of nerves and excitement. Sophia took a slow sip of her wine before speaking again. "It doesn't have to mean anything," she said carefully. "It's just an experience. Something to remember. Something outside the lives we've built." Daniel's pulse quickened. He wanted to protest, to stand up and say no, to pull Clara close and remind her of the vows they had made. Yet the words froze in his throat. He looked at Clara, and instead of guilt or regret, he saw curiosity in her eyes, curiosity, and maybe even longing. Adrian exhaled sharply and ran his hand through his hair. "You can't be serious," he muttered. But his voice lacked conviction. His eyes betrayed him. He, too, was thinking about it, weighing the forbidden idea against the stability of the life he knew. Clara leaned forward, her hands clasped together. "Think about it," she whispered. "We've all known each other for years. We trust each other. It's not about betrayal. It's about letting ourselves feel something different, something new." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. The woman he thought he knew, the marriage he thought was unshakable, suddenly seemed fragile. He wanted to shout, "This is madness!" But at the same time, a darker voice whispered inside him, "What if she's right? What if this changes nothing or changes everything in ways you secretly want?" His thoughts tangled. He remembered the distance that had grown between him and Clara, the way she often drifted into silence at home, the way their conversations had become routine. Was this her way of searching for something they had lost? Or had she been dreaming of this all along? Sophia's eyes lingered on Daniel now, calm but steady, as though testing him. "It doesn't have to break us," she said. "It could show us who we really are, what we still desire, what we've forgotten to feel." Adrian shifted uncomfortably, but didn't argue further. His silence was louder than words. Daniel pressed his hands into his knees, his breath shallow. He looked at Clara, desperate for her to take it back, to laugh and say it was all a game. But she didn't. She held his gaze instead, her eyes searching his, asking a question without words. Would he say no, or would he follow her into the unknown? The tension in the room was unbearable, so sharp it seemed to slice the air. Daniel could almost hear his own heartbeat pounding against the walls of his chest. Finally, Clara reached for her glass, her hand trembling just slightly. She took a sip, then whispered, "We're not asking for forever. Just one night. Just once." The words settled deep into Daniel's bones, heavy and irreversible. No one spoke after that. The fire crackled softly, shadows dancing along the walls like silent witnesses to a secret too dangerous to be spoken aloud again. The four of them sat in silence, each trapped in their own storm of thoughts. Adrian stared into his glass, his, jaw tight. Sophia leaned back, her expression unreadable, though her eyes glimmered with something Daniel couldn't name. Clara looked too calm, as though she had finally unburdened herself of something she had been carrying for a long time. Daniel sat frozen, his mind a battlefield. Love, trust, fear, curiosity all colliding until he didn't know what was real anymore. The fire dimmed further, the night deepening around them. Daniel realized with a sinking heart that the line had already been crossed. Whether they spoke of it again or not, whether they acted or not, the suggestion had already changed everything. For the first time in years, Daniel no longer recognized his own marriage. And as he stared at Clara across the fading glow of the fire, he knew this was only the beginning of a night that would alter all of their lives forever. The fire had burned down to a faint orange glow, casting only enough light to make the silence heavier. None of them had spoken for long minutes after Clara's quiet suggestion, though her words seemed to echo in the wooden cabin as though the walls themselves remembered them. It was Adrian who finally stood, his chair scraping softly against the rug. "Daniel," he said, his voice low, "come outside with me for a moment." Daniel hesitated, but the weight in the room pressed him forward. He followed Adrian onto the porch, leaving Clara and Sophia inside. The cold mountain air hit his face, sharp and almost cleansing, but not enough to steady the storm raging within him. The night was clear, stars scattered like silver dust across the black sky. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their whispers almost mocking. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets, staring at the valley below. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Adrian broke the silence first. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Did you hear what she said? Did your wife really mean that?" Daniel exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know if it was the wine or she's been thinking about it for a long time." Adrian paced across the porch, running a hand through his hair. "Sophia doesn't say things she doesn't mean. If she suggested this, it's because she wants it." And if Clara agreed? He trailed off, frustration spilling into the air between them. Daniel leaned against the wooden railing, gripping it until his knuckles turned white. "It feels like I don't even know her anymore. She looked at me when she said those words, and it was like she was asking me to understand something I never saw coming." Adrian stopped pacing. He stared out into the darkness, his expression torn. "So what do we do, Daniel? Say yes? Say no? Either way, nothing will be the same." Inside the cabin, laughter floated faintly through the walls. Not loud laughter, but soft, intimate giggles. The kind shared between people who understood each other too well. The sound stabbed through Daniel's chest, making it hard to breathe. He turned his face away from Adrian, his voice almost breaking. "Do you hear that? They're in there. Already closer than we realized." Adrian's jaw tightened. He closed his eyes for a moment as though steadying himself. They've probably been talking about this before tonight. Maybe even planning it. Daniel's stomach twisted. He didn't want to believe it, yet deep down the thought didn't feel impossible. Clara and Sophia had always been close, sharing secrets, finishing each other's sentences, exchanging glances that no one else understood. Tonight, though, those glances carried something heavier. The cold air bit harder, sinking into Daniel's skin. "I don't know what's worse," he whispered. "The idea of saying yes, or the idea that she might resent me if I say no." Adrian walked to the railing and leaned beside him, his voice quieter now. "You love her." Daniel's answer came without hesitation. More than anything, his throat tightened. "But I don't know if love is enough anymore. What if this is what she needs to feel alive again? What if I'm not enough?" The words nearly broke him as they left his lips. He had never admitted them aloud, not even to himself. Adrian sighed, his breath hanging in the cold. "I feel the same. Thought Sophia and I were solid. But tonight, I saw her eyes. I saw her looking at Clara the way she used to look at me, and it scared me. The two men stood there in silence, the truth of their words hanging between them like fragile glass. Neither wanted to shatter it, but neither could escape it. Inside, the sound of the women's voices continued softer, now like whispers carried by the wind. Daniel's imagination betrayed him, filling the silence with images he wasn't ready to face. Clara leaning closer to Sophia. Sophia's hand brushing Clara's secrets spoken between them that excluded him entirely. He pressed a hand over his face, groaning softly. If we agree, we risk destroying everything. If we refuse, we might still lose them. There's no winning here. Adrian's voice was low, almost bitter. Maybe there's no winning in marriage. It's just choices you make and the consequences you live with. Daniel dropped his hand, staring at the stars as though they might offer an answer. So what do we do? Adrian looked at him, his face shadowed in the dim starlight. We wait. We go back inside, we sit with them, and we see if this is something they truly want, or just something they said to test us. Daniel's heart pounded painfully in his chest. And if it's real? Adrian's eyes darkened. Then we make a choice, together or apart, but a choice all the same. The porch fell silent again, the weight of their dilemma pressing heavily on both men. Daniel's thoughts swirled with fear, love, jealousy, and curiosity, each emotion fighting for control. At last, Adrian pushed away from the railing. "Come on," he said, his voice weary. "Let's not leave them waiting too long." Daniel followed, his legs heavy as though the ground beneath him had turned to stone. When they stepped back inside, the fire was nearly out, leaving only a faint glow. Clara and Sophia sat close together on the couch, their knees touching, their laughter fading into soft smiles. They looked up as the men entered, their eyes carrying questions, maybe even hope. The room felt smaller now, suffocating with the weight of what had been said. Daniel's gaze found Clara's. Her eyes were steady, almost pleading. She didn't say a word, but he knew what she was asking. Will you let this happen? Will you let me have this night? Daniel's chest tightened, his heart threatening to break. He didn't answer, not yet. But deep inside, he knew the night was heading toward a decision none of them could escape. And as he sat down, the silence returned, heavier than before. It was no longer just silence. It was the sound of love, loyalty, and desire colliding and demanding an answer before the night was over. The silence in the cabin pressed against them like a living thing. The fire was nearly gone now, reduced to faint embers glowing in the fireplace. The wine glasses sat half empty on the table, their rims catching the flicker of candlelight. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as though waiting to see what choice would be made inside those wooden walls. Daniel sat on the edge of his chair, his palms pressed against his knees. He could feel Clara's eyes on him, searching, pleading. Without words, his chest ached, torn between anger and longing. He wanted to stop her, to remind her of the promises they had once made. But the truth weighed heavy in his heart. Clara wasn't asking for a divorce, nor was she confessing to betrayal. She was asking for freedom. Just one night, something she claimed would change nothing. And yet, he knew it would change everything. Sophia leaned back against the couch, her hand brushing against Clara's, a small, almost invisible gesture. The sight tightened Daniel's throat. Adrian shifted uncomfortably beside her, his jaw set, his eyes darting between his wife and Daniel's. It happened slowly, like water finding its path through stone. No agreement was spoken, no permission given. And yet, as the moments stretched, something invisible guided them toward a choice none of them would fully understand until it was too late. Clara rose first. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, though her hands trembled as she set her glass on the table. She turned toward Adrian, her lips parting as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, she simply looked at him, a look that carried both fear and invitation. Adrian hesitated, his breath heavy, He glanced once at Sophia, who gave the faintest nod, her expression calm, almost resigned. And then, as though the air had pushed him forward, Adrian stood and walked beside Clara toward the hallway. Their footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor, then disappeared into one of the bedrooms. Daniel's heart thundered inside his chest. He stared at the empty hallway, his mind screaming, "Stop this. Call her back. Don't let her go." But his body refused to move. He sat frozen, his breath shallow, his hands trembling, and then he felt Sophia's gaze on him. He turned, meeting her eyes, and for the first time that night, he saw not confidence or mischief, but a quiet sadness. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his hand where it rested on his knee. "You don't have to fight it," she whispered. Daniel swallowed hard, his voice rough. "And if I don't, what happens tomorrow?" Sophia's lips curved into a small, bitter-sweet smile. "Tomorrow always comes, no matter what we do tonight." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with truth. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, his heart aching. He thought of Clara, of their life together, their wedding day. The way she used to laugh in the mornings, the way she once looked at him as though he was her whole world. Somewhere along the way, that light had dimmed, and tonight she had sought it in someone else. When he opened his eyes, Sophia was still there, her hand warm against his. There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. And in that moment, Daniel realized she, too, was caught in the same storm-loving someone, yet longing for something that love alone had not given her. Without a word, Daniel stood. Sophia rose beside him, their movements slow, uncertain. They walked together down the hallway, past the closed door where Clara and Adrian had disappeared, and entered the other room. The bedroom smelled faintly of cedar wood. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, painting the room in silver shadows. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. Sophia sat beside him, her presence calm, steady. For a long while, they didn't touch. They simply sat there, two people bound by the same ache, the same unspoken question. Why wasn't love enough? Finally, Sophia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not about replacing them. It's not even about betraying them. It's about remembering what it feels like to be seen again." Daniel turned to her, his throat tightening. "Do you feel unseen?" Her eyes shimmered in the moonlight. "Don't you?" The silence between them was answer enough. What followed wasn't rushed, nor was it wild. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about vulnerability, about searching for pieces of themselves they had lost in the weight of years, routine, and silence. They spoke in hushed voices, shared confessions they had never dared to tell their spouses, and held each other as though the world outside the cabin no longer existed. And yet, even in those moments of closeness, Daniel felt the sting of guilt. Every touch, every word was shadowed by the image of Clara in another room. In another man's arms, the night stretched endlessly, time blurring into something softer, heavier. The forest outside sighed with the wind. The cabin creaked gently as though it too listened to their confessions. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sophia was beside him, her breathing slow, her body curled lightly against his. He felt no triumph, no thrill, only a quiet ache. The kind of ache that came when you knew you had crossed a line you could never uncross. He rose quietly, careful not to wake her, and stood by the window. The morning sun painted the mountains in gold. But Daniel felt none of its warmth. From the hallway, he heard a door creak open. Clara stepped out, her hair tousled, her eyes heavy. She paused when she saw him, and for a moment they simply stared at each other across the space between. No words passed, no excuses, no explanations, only silence. And in that silence, Daniel knew the truth. Last night wasn't just a night, it was a a breaking point. Whether their marriages survived or not, nothing would ever be the same. The cabin was wrapped in silence when the sun finally rose. It's kind of silence that pressed against the walls and filled every corner. The birds outside had begun their chorus, soft and distant, but inside, the air was heavy. It was not the silence of peace, but of unspoken truths. Daniel stood in the small kitchen, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. He hadn't slept, not really. He'd closed his eyes for a while, but his mind had run in circles all night, chasing memories of Clara, of what she meant to him, and of what had happened only a few feet away in that cabin. The coffee did little to clear the fog in his head. He heard footsteps behind him. Clara appeared, her hair messy, her eyes tired, her face pale with the weight of what had passed. She paused in the doorway, as though unsure if she had the right to enter the same room as him anymore. For a moment, Daniel's heart ached to reach out to take her into his arms and hold her. But his body stayed frozen. "Morning," she whispered, her voice cracked. Daniel nodded slowly. "Morning, nothing else." "Not yet." From the other side of the cabin, another door opened. Adrian stepped out, his shirt rumpled, his face clouded. He avoided Daniel's eyes, instead busying himself with pouring water from a bottle. Behind him, Sophia lingered, her expression unreadable, her movements calm in a way that seemed almost unnatural. The four of them stood in that kitchen, together, yet apart, like strangers who had shared a secret they could never speak aloud. Sophia was the first to break the silence. She sat at the table, her tone light, but her eyes heavy. "We should probably head back soon. The roads will be clearer in the morning." Her words were practical, but beneath them was something more I need to escape, to return to normality, to bury what had happened under the weight of ordinary life. Daniel took another sip of coffee, staring into the dark liquid. He wondered if normality was even possible anymore. Clara finally stepped forward, her hands fidgeting as she spoke. "Daniel." Her voice trembled, fragile. I don't know what to say." He looked at her then, his eyes meeting hers. And for the first time since the night before, he let himself truly see her. She looked small, frightened, yet there was still a softness in her gaze, as if she were hoping for forgiveness. "You don't have to say anything," he replied, though. His voice was flat. "We both know what happened." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, pressing her lips together. "It didn't mean I don't love you," she whispered. Daniel's chest tightened. "Love doesn't always survive what happened. Last night?" The words hung between them like smoke, suffocating and impossible to ignore. Adrian shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Maybe it's better if we just leave it all here. Forget it happened." "We don't have to, Daniel." Cut him off, his voice sharp. "Do you really think we can forget this?" Adrian flinched, and Sophia reached out, placing a steadying hand on his arm. Her eyes met Daniel's, calm but sorrowful. "He's not wrong, Daniel. Forgetting isn't the word, but carrying it with us will destroy more than it already." Daniel stared at her, searching for answers in her face, but found none. Only weariness. The morning moved slowly. They packed their bags in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The cabin, once filled with laughter and the warmth of friendship, now felt like a graveyard of broken promises. Every corner seemed to echo with ghosts of the night before the firelight on Clara's face. The sound of footsteps down the hallway whispered confessions in the dark. When the car was finally loaded, they stood outside for a moment, the mountain air crisp and cool against their skin. The forest stretched endlessly around them. Indifferent to their turmoil, Clara slipped her hand into Daniel's, hesitantly, as though testing whether she was still allowed that closeness. For a heartbeat, he let their palms warm against each other. Then slowly he pulled his hand away. The ride back was long and quiet. The car wound down the mountain roads, the trees blurring past, the sky wide and endless. Adrian drove, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the road. Sophia sat beside him, her